If you've ever been pregnant or have had a friend who's been pregnant in the workplace, this is an episode for you. We're talking all things pregnancy rights and discrimination and retaliation in the workplace. So stay tuned. Listen in, like, share, subscribe. I have a lot of friends that are pregnant right now. I don't know if it's just pregnancy season, but we got a lot of questions on Instagram also about pregnancy rights, pregnancy discrimination, maternity leave, nursing, lactation, everything. So let's get into it. Let's talk about California law and federal law. And before we get into the nitty gritty, do you want to start by just kind of giving us a high level overview?
Yes, absolutely. So this is sort of the way that the law layers on top of each other. Federal law, I like to say, it creates a floor so that they're the basic pregnancy laws that exist at the federal level, and all states have to comply with those pregnancy laws. Then certain states can build a layer on top and provide workers with more protection. And California has probably some of the most protective laws in the country. And if those federal and state laws are ever in conflict, then generally the law that provides the most protection to the employee is the one that's followed. And then beyond that, employers are welcome to provide additional protections or additional, perks and bonus paid time off or other incentives or other benefits to their employees.
Is the law different depending on the size of the employer, or is it like everyone has the same protections?
Yes. So smaller employers, there's more exceptions for them, and there's some ease that they get that the larger employers and the very financially healthy employers don't get. So that is taken into account in the various laws.
Is that the same for federal, or is that just at the local state law?
Both.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
where should we start? Yeah.
So let's start. So federally, there are a number of laws. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the basic law that most often gets litigated and used in the pregnancy context is called FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. And that provides pregnant workers 12 weeks of unpaid time off and job protections. That means you can take 12 weeks off and you have to be able to return to your job. So this can be used for all kinds of medical issues, not just pregnancy, but most commonly on the federal level, that's one that's used.
And wait, let me pause you. Is that just for the women that are carrying the baby, or is that for both spouses?
It could be for both spouses. Yeah. It depends on what the medical leave issue is that the other spouse is dealing with. But yeah, we'll get into some of the protections for spouses or adoptive parents or folks who aren't actually giving birth to the babies a little bit later in the episode. But That's the basic federal law. Then California, again, layers on top of that. And there, I should say also, there's federal anti-discrimination statutes as well that protect pregnant workers and gender, and on the basis of gender as well, which provides some protection for pregnant women. So California layers on top of that. So the anti-discrimination statutes is under the Fair Employment and Housing Act that applies to pregnant women because pregnancy is a protected class in California. Can't be discriminated against if you're pregnant. And we also have the California Family Rights Act. And that's sort of our state version of the FMLA rules, and that applies to 5 or more employees, so employers that have 5 or more employees. Pregnancy disability leave also applies to 5 or more employees, and that gives you 4 months of leave for a pregnancy-related disability. And then we actually also have a paid family leave program, which the state funds for paid leave. And that is a wage replacement, again, through the state's SDI system.
Okay, so what's the best case scenario and worst case scenario? How much time do you get off?
So it depends. You have to layer and stack some of these things together, right? So some people, well, you were pregnant, Ajay. Do you remember how much time you had off?
Well, that's a little different because I employ myself. So I had a little better flexibility. I had a great boss at the time.
Same boss as now.
Same boss as now.
Also you.
That's true. But my husband, he was working for a large company that had like 800 employees. Mm-hmm. And he got the 12 weeks off. And I think a portion of it was paid and a portion of it was unpaid. And I can't remember the specifics. But I remember at the time being really impressed because it was the first time I had ever been pregnant. We only have one kid.
Yep.
I was not familiar with the process going through all of that, but I was impressed that they were giving him, as the male partner that didn't carry the child, a full 12 weeks off. And I thought that was amazing and hugely important for bonding and to help support me and my like post-delivery phase and all of that. And so it just kind of opened my eyes to the protections that I think we have in California and the importance that certain employers put on those protections that maybe not everyone gets, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're so lucky to live here. And I think it really, our legal scheme around pregnant women, but also just families in general. So husbands, spouses, surrogates, the whole onslaught of possible scenarios when it comes to having a child is really protected, and it's important. And I think if we're looking really at a macro level, like the way to have a functioning economy is to recognize that in order to populate the earth, we need to have babies, but the people that are having those babies would also like to keep their jobs and come back to work and not have to worry about finding a job when they have a newborn baby, and all of these sort of practical considerations. So yes. So the bottom line here is that if you are a pregnant employee in California, you have more legal protection than a federal employee does. And so again, we're lucky to live here, but there are federal protections as well.
Great. And then more protection if you're in a workplace that has more than 5 people.
Yes.
Great.
Correct. Yeah. And another question that I get a lot, which has a lot more applicability sort of across the board, is pregnancy discrimination and how that comes into effect. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, when do you see that crop up? Is that before birth, after they give birth?
Right,
all
great
over
question.
The map?
It's at every stage, right?
Okay.
So it's at every stage from the point that a pregnant woman and we'll just use the example of pregnant women because that's the most common client that I have in my practice and the most common case that I have. But certainly a man who's taking time off to care for his pregnant wife or take care for their newborn baby could also absolutely has protection under the law as well. But so the way this comes up, the way that I see it come up is a pregnant woman gives notice, tells her employer, I'm pregnant. And that could come in a multiple different time periods of her employment as well. If she's interviewing for the job and her boss says, are you pregnant or are you planning to get pregnant? That's not a good question for an employer to ask. And that could trigger a possible discriminatory pattern depending on what happens after that. But the decision, and I know this from my own pregnant friends, the decision of when to give notice to your employer and how to do it can often be very stressful for people. And one of the reasons for that is because I think women are concerned about whether they'll be retaliated against, whether their portions of their job will be taken away, or whether they'll have a job, So it can start from when you first tell your employer about it, but then it can happen unfortunately, multiple different times throughout the stage of your pregnancy. If you have, a lot of pregnant women have back issues and they can't sit or stand in a certain position for very long. And if they ask for an accommodation for that and they get pushed back around that, that's very similar to, the protections for disabled employees. So it can happen then. It can happen when they actually take time off and tell their employer how much time they are requesting off, again, pursuant to the laws that we just talked about, right? And they come back to a job that isn't the same. Or God forbid they're fired during their leave or when they come back. And then they also have some risk on the back end when they're lactating and when they maybe also have some medical issues they're dealing with that arose after the pregnancy. So unfortunately, lots of different opportunities for discrimination to crop up. And
what are some easy red flags? Like if you're the worker, what are some things that you see as patterns in your practice?
Mm-hmm.
Like termination right when you get back from maternity leave, I have to imagine is a triggering event.
Yeah, exactly. So we call it close temporal proximity. So if you give notice and then your employer does something, to simplify, does something bad to you really quickly in time right after that, that's an immediate red flag. That's something that you would want to possibly talk to a lawyer about if there's no other justification for what the employer is doing and it gives you that feeling that something might not be right. So close temporal proximity is one thing. But in most of my cases, what we look at is, again, what are the reasons that the employer is giving you for what they're doing? And when I say what they're doing, what I mean is, are they cutting your pay or demoting you or terminating you, something that we call an adverse employment action? If they don't have any other reason for doing it other than you just happen to give notice that you're going out on maternity leave or notified them you're pregnant, that would be enough to raise a red flag. Sometimes there's justified reasons why employers do things that has nothing to do with your pregnancy, right? But that's one thing, or a lot of pushback around the accommodations that you need for your physical health, right? If I'm a pregnant employee and I go to my doctor and I get a medical note saying I need a certain lumbar pillow because I need some help because I'm in pain, and your employer gives you pushback, that's going to be a problem.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a certain amount of time that you have to give an employer? Like, some people work remotely. Maybe nobody's going to see that you're growing in the belly. Do you have to give like a month's notice or 2 months notice? Or can you say the week before, hey, I'm having a baby next week. I'll be out for the next 12 weeks.
So there's no legal requirement for notice. So the legal answer is no. I often tell people to try, when clients come to me with this issue of when do I give notice, I try to counsel them through some of the practical considerations, right? And it's always a good idea to be as fair as possible in your dealings with your employer. And, it depends on when you've learned about the pregnancy. It depends on what's happening at work. But I always say, I like to expect the best out of people, that employers will follow the law and be fair to you. And so if you give them enough runway, you can work with them to decide how to distribute your work, for example, or make necessary arrangements while you're out.
Yeah. So be reasonable.
Be reasonable.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think people often ask also, what do I do if I think I'm being discriminated against? And I always tell them, like I tell everyone, and I'm sure you have told your clients, documenting things is great. If you're having communications with HR about, when you're taking time off and you're getting pushback, if you can save those emails. But the bigger thing that I tell folks is it's so good to go into those conversations knowing what your rights are. Do a look-see on what leave you're entitled to, what your benefits are. Make sure that you're well informed so that you can go and have an honest conversation about what will happen when you go on leave. Because unfortunately, what I've seen is some employers aren't incentivized to give you the full piece, the full portfolio of benefits that are available to you, because maybe they don't want you to take all of them, for example, and that would be also a sketchy situation. But it's always good to know your rights. So do some research, go in, have a plan, be honest and act in good faith, and hopefully everything goes the way it should.
Yeah. I feel like healthcare providers are pretty good too. I know at least when I was pregnant, my healthcare provider gave me a list of like, here's all the benefits that you're entitled to, and here's how you apply for family medical leave. And they had like a sheet that they were handing out, which I was like, oh, that's really
absolutely
super helpful.
Such a good point. Such a good way for people to get access to information about their rights. The other folks that are really helpful are lactation consultants, because if you, and I have a couple cases that go into this area right now, but women who are experiencing a lot of stress can have trouble expressing milk, and that has an impact on the way that a lactation consultant will work with you. So I have some of my clients who will like share the challenges that they've had working and being entitled to all the protections under the lactation laws. And the lactation consultant's like, here's what your workplace is supposed to do for you. So FYI, go back to them and ask them for this and this and this. So that's also another resource that can be available to people.
What if you just have a really rough pregnancy? Like I was very sick throughout my pregnancy. Mm-hmm. Again, I had a great employer at the time, but
yeah.
If you don't find yourself in that situation, you have morning sickness, for example. And so you're constantly, back and forth with nausea.
Yep.
How do you deal with that? What if you work in a small restaurant, your employer can't accommodate that?
Yeah. So again, this is going to be fact specific based on the employer and what types of benefits that folks have, right? So sometimes, usually there's sick time off, there's paid time off that you get, and those are irrespective of whether you're pregnant or not, right? And then some of the leaves that we've talked about can be split up. So you don't have to take all 12 weeks all at the same time. You can take a day here, a couple days here and there. But the other thing is, if you have a physical condition or a mental or emotional one, and it's impacting your ability to do the essential functions of your job, there's a whole slew of disability protections that could apply to you. And that, again, requires talking to your doctor, seeing whether there's restrictions that could help you in the workplace, and then engaging in what we call an interactive process with the employer, and going through, what accommodations they could give you. So to answer your question, if you're an employee that's really just struggling to complete your job because of something physical or mental that's happening, I always tell people the first thing is to try to take care of your physical health before even thinking about a lawsuit. Let's start there and go to your doctor and see what restrictions could apply. And if your employer doesn't talk to you about that and give you, after engaging in this process with you, give you what you need, then it may be time to talk to a lawyer at that point.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you brought up lactation. So let's talk about it.
Yes.
I will say, again, having had a child, the hospitals are really putting pressure on moms to breastfeed. Breast is Best is like the campaign that they're pushing on everybody in labor and delivery, and really encouraging people to breastfeed. Some people can do it, some people can't for all kinds of reasons. But I think the leading kind of popular thing right now is breastfeeding if you can, and to do it as long as you possibly can. And so more than 12 weeks. And people have to go back to work and they're still breastfeeding. And so they're pumping, they're lactating, they're doing all the things. So what does an employer have to do in the workplace to accommodate a mom that's back to work, that is lactating, that needs to like pump throughout the day?
Yeah, great question. And I also just need to call out something very frustrating that I know women in sort of our vintage and our age group have experienced more recently, is just the pressure on mothers in general to do everything all the time. And, I follow someone named Emma Greed who just wrote a book about this exact issue, and she's a career woman and she owns a bunch of companies and like Good Americans and Skims with Kim Kardashian, and she has 4 kids, I think, and she talks about this all the time, like this standard of motherhood that is impossible to meet completely, especially if you also have a career. And so all of that, I say all of that because I think it's relevant to this issue, which is it can be really hard for women to do all the things necessary to raise a healthy child. And they are getting pressure from a lot of different places. And as I mentioned, that can actually also impact your ability to lactate properly. And so as an overlay, I think we just need to call that out, that it is not an easy go of it. And not everyone is super familiar with how much of a struggle lactating can be, both mentally, emotionally, physically, all the things.
Well,
right?
I am. I did
Yeah,
it.
you are.
I went through it. It was miserable.
I'm a childless woman, so
it was miserable.
Yeah, it's rough. Yeah. So I mean, I have a couple of cases right now where, women had had babies and went back to the workplace and really wanted to obviously pump, and because for those who are ignorant about this issue and maybe don't understand. Obviously, at the workplace, you don't have your baby with you, but you still need to collect breast milk for them. So there are these devices called pumps that need to be cleaned, and the milk needs to be stored in a safe place. And it's a whole situation. So what do the laws require? The laws are very specific about the space that the employer needs to provide to a woman who's lactating. It needs to be private to some degree, so shielded from view so that she's not doing it out in the public.
Makes sense.
Free from intrusion from coworkers. So usually that means a locked door. It's safe and clean and free of hazardous materials. So it can't be, in a janitor's closet with a bunch of open chemicals. And that the woman has access to electricity or a power source. That's for the pump. And that there's a sink and running water and a refrigerator nearby. It doesn't have to be in the exact place where she's pumping, but she needs to have access to that. Very importantly, the statute provides that the place an employer gives a woman to lactate cannot be a bathroom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
disgusting.
Yeah.
Having dealt with all of that equipment and needing everything to stay really sanitary, that obviously makes sense that you shouldn't be doing that in a restroom.
Yes. And for sanitary reasons, for comfort of the woman reasons. And, we don't need to go into the details about why, but it's not a nice thing to have to sit on a toilet for however long it takes you to pump while whatever else is happening in the bathroom is happening in the bathroom. So,
that's a great point though on timing, because
yes,
again, having gone through it myself and having so many girlfriends that have gone through it, it doesn't always take the same amount of time. Like sometimes you hook up the pump and in 3 minutes you got full, you got 8 ounces and you're happy. And then sometimes you're like struggling. And again, it could be stress related. It could be a hard day. You could be really tired, dehydrated, whatever it is, it takes longer.
Yep.
And so how much time accommodation does the employer have to give you enough time to do what you need to do? So
the law is a little bit flexible on this point. It's basically the employer has to give the employee enough time to express milk. So what does that mean? They don't have to. I think the idea in the practical setting is that an employee would use their rest breaks if they already have like pre-scheduled rest breaks or meal breaks to express milk. But you and I both know that the female body doesn't work that way.
Right.
You can't say, well, at 10:30 today, that's going to be when I start this whole machinery, right?
Right.
So what ends up happening is the employer has to give the employee time to do what they need to do. The law does not require that time to be paid. So again, this is an area where practical realities of life and the female body aren't a perfect fit into what the law and the statutes say. But that's why being in a reasonable workplace with reasonable humans who can talk to you about what you need and work out a situation that that works for both sides is just so important, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can't fit a square peg into a round hole all the
Right.
time.
Okay, so side note, because you were just talking about how we have all of these unreasonable expectations on us as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So you just said that the lactation time is during the rest break.
Mm-hmm.
So again, our break, our 15 minutes of sanity away from tending to customers or doing whatever it is that we do, is to then pump and clean gear and do the whole lactation process, which again, for some people, good for them. If it took 15 minutes, it took me much longer than that.
Yeah.
But again, it's just the consistent demands on women to fit everything into the same schedule as everybody else when our demands are so much higher.
Yes. And like, it's annoying. I think a lot of women are like, I would just like to do my job and not have to deal with this thing right now, right? And then there's also another emotional overlay that we haven't talked about, which is it can be really hard to go back to work and leave your baby.
Yeah.
So it's just it is a challenge, and that's why I take my job so seriously of sort of fighting for people and advocating for people who are a little more vulnerable in the workplace or who are just going through it and don't get a fair shot. And this is an area that is really rife for discrimination. And that's the other thing. You can't be discriminated against for asking to take a lactation break or retaliated against for doing that. There are protections under the law. And to your point earlier, you said, I need more than 12 weeks to lactate. These laws apply for a year after return. So
wow. So they only have to give you a year.
1 year after the child's birth. Yeah.
Because I know people that breastfed past 12 months.
Yeah. Well, and again, hopefully you're at a workplace where you can go to the employer and say, I'm still lactating. This is still happening.
Right.
Please let me go somewhere, not a bathroom.
Right. Right. Definitely not a bathroom.
And do the thing.
Let's talk about dads. Because again, we've spent a lot of time talking about moms and being in a heterosexual relationship myself. My spouse is a husband and I needed him. And our child also needed him. So that those early weeks of bonding are so important. If you've gone through it, you know how important it is.
Yeah.
And so what protections are there for dads?
Yeah.
And I imagine that discrimination against men is probably equal in terms of, the frequency that you're seeing that, because I'm sure a lot of employers are like, ugh, when I was raising my kids in the 70s and 80s, dads didn't take any time off.
100%. 100%. And there's so much gender inequity in the way people think about men taking time off versus women, right? It's sort of more discussed and talked about that, a woman's pregnant, she's going to take time off. That makes sense. But yeah, it can be tough. And frankly, I don't actually have a lot of cases around this. And I think that also might be sort of a systemic issue of men not wanting to come forward and maybe bring a lawsuit around something like discrimination on the basis of this. I don't know. That's just me speculating. But I have not ever actually represented, I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever represented a dad for this type of law. But here's the rub. Here's what the law provides. So the California Family Rights Act, which we discussed, provides 12 weeks of unpaid leave. That applies for dads too. So you can take 12 weeks of unpaid leave. Dads can split that up. So you could do, if you want to do a couple weeks when your baby is first born, go back to work for a couple weeks, come back, you can do that. There is also paid family leave applies to non-birth parents. So, husband, spouse, domestic partner, I believe. And both parents can take CFRA simultaneously. You can do that at the same time. And California law is actually, I believe, more inclusive in terms of how parent is defined than a lot of other states. So yeah, it's defined quite broadly. It includes leave for bonding, regardless of marital status, regardless of sexual orientation or how the child came to be.
Got it.
And the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is really important for us to mention, is for all of these laws, an employer can't retaliate against you for asking to take time off or lactate or anything we discussed. They can't retaliate against you for actually taking it, and they can't interfere with your right to take it. So if you have an HR person who's giving you incorrect information and making it very hard for you to take what's legally mandated, that what your legal right is to take, that could be an interference or retaliation claim separately.
Right. I think we will probably drop in the links below this episode some great websites where you can get
Yeah.
information on paid family leave and how you apply for it and kind of what the rundown is in terms of state and federal laws that
Yeah.
apply. That'd be super helpful.
I'd love to do that. And the only thing last thing that I'll mention is California also provides protections for what's called reproductive decision making. So that means you can't be discriminated against for having an abortion performed, anything to do with IVF, egg freezing, embryo fertilization, any of that is all also a protected class, meaning if your employer finds out that you had an abortion, for example, and they don't agree with your choice to do that, or they don't agree with your choice to freeze your eggs, you as a worker cannot be discriminated against for making that choice. The law also provides some protections for child loss as well, which is obviously totally tragic, but something unfortunately really common. So worth mentioning that if you think that your employer is doing something that they shouldn't be doing with respect to any of those really tough issues, then it might be time to talk to a lawyer as well.
Okay. So I think the takeaway, again, this is your area, not mine, but if it doesn't feel right, if it feels like your employer has changed the way that they're interacting with you or the fairness that they're giving you because you've announced a pregnancy or you've returned from pregnancy, talk to a lawyer.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you have enough to deal with as a new mom. Let the lawyer
Definitely.
fight the legal fight for you.
Definitely. All right.
What
Thanks,
are we drinking today?
We are drinking Verve from brewed in
Santa Cruz?
Santa Cruz.
Yeah. It's a good one. I like this one.
This one I think is called Daybreak.
Yeah.
It's like a dark roast.
Yep.
Really
Notes of
enjoying it.
marshmallow and golden apple.
Delicious.
Delish.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks, Sanjay.